The night the Nine Tails came for Konoha, nobody was watching the orphan on the rooftop. That was the mistake. Everyone's eyes were on the horizon where a shape taller than the Hawkage monument tore through moonlit cloud cover, nine tails lashing behind it like separate storms. Every shinobi who could still stand had been mobilized. Every civilian who could still run was running. And in the chaos of screaming sirens and collapsing rooftops, a boy no older than 6 sat cross-legged on the tiled roof of the orphanage, watching the demon fox the way other children watched fireworks. His name, as far as anyone in Konoha knew, was Goku. Nobody remembered assigning it to him. He had simply arrived one morning 6 years earlier. No parents, no birth record, no clan seal, found asleep in a bamboo grove outside the village gates by a patrol that swore the grove hadn't held so much as a wrapper the day before. The third Hawkage had shrugged it off as one of the countless quiet mysteries a shinobi village accumulates, and placed him in the orphanage like any other unclaimed child. The other mystery, the one that actually mattered to the orphanage matron, was that Goku could not perform a single jutsu, not the Academy's basic transformation. Not the substitution technique that even the clumsiest civilian-born student managed by age 7. Instructors had tested him for chakra exhaustion, for a blocked tenketsu, for the telltale signs of an unawakened Kekkei Genkai. Every test came back the same. Chakra readings so faint they barely registered on a sensor scroll, and yet the boy could outsprint Chunin twice his age, catch thrown Kune out of the air with his bare hand, and once cracked a training post clean in half with what the instructor swore was an open-palmed shove and nothing more. Some kind of freak taijutsu prodigy with broken chakra, the academy staff called him when they thought he wasn't listening. He always was. He just didn't understand why it was said like an insult. Goku didn't think about chakra much. He didn't think about most things the way the other kids did. What he thought about near constantly was the warm cold feeling low in his stomach that flared hot whenever he pushed his body past its limit, a feeling that had no name in this world, though some deep unbothered part of him recognized it instantly, the way you recognize your own heartbeat. He called it his fighting feeling. It was the only inheritance he had on the rooftop, watching the fox level a district with a single sweep of its tail. That feeling was roaring. "That's a big one," he said out loud to nobody. Below him, in the ruins of a collapsed nursery ward, a woman's scream cut off mid-syllable as debris buried a hallway. Goku's head snapped toward the sound before his brain finished processing it, some instinct older than memory, older than this body, already moving his legs before he decided to move them. He hit the ground 3 stories down without breaking stride. Inside the ruined maternity ward, Biwako Sarutobi, the third Hawkage's wife, coordinating the evacuation of newborns while her husband prepared to face the fox himself, was pinned beneath a support beam with 2 infants clutched against her chest. One of them still screeching with the specific fury of a baby who has just been born into the single worst night in his village's history. She heard footsteps that shouldn't have belonged to a child crunching over rubble that shouldn't have been movable by anything short of a Jonin. Goku didn't ask questions. He got both hands under the beam, a slab of reinforced timber that had taken 4 adult shinobi to install, and heaved it upward with a grunt that ended in a short, sharp shout, chakra-less muscle doing something chakra was supposed to make possible. The beam groaned, then lifted, then flew a good 15 feet before crashing through what remained of a wall. Iwako stared up at him. She would later swear to the third that in that half-second the boy's dark eyes had flickered just once with a color that didn't belong in a human iris. "You're bleeding," Goku said, pointing at her leg, entirely unbothered by what he'd just done. "You should sit still, I'll carry the bobbies." "Absolutely not," she managed, hauling herself upright anyway because there was no time to argue physics with a child who'd apparently decided physics was optional. "Get them to the shelter. Now, go." He was already gone, one infant cradled in each arm with a gentleness that contradicted everything about how he'd just torn a support beam out of a collapsed building, sprinting through burning streets faster than the wind stirred by the fox's roars behind him. The screaming baby in his right arm had whisker-marked birthmarks on his cheeks and a wisp of blonde hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. Goku glanced down at him once mid-sprint, and for reasons he couldn't have articulated even to himself, felt that warm coiled fighting feeling settle just slightly into something gentler, something protective. "Loud," he told the baby. "I like that, means you've got a lot of energy in there," infant kept screaming. Goku grinned anyway. The 4th Hawkage sealed the 9 tails into his newborn son a little after midnight, and gave his life doing it. By dawn, Konoha was a wreck of collapsed buildings, grieving families, and a village council trying to process the death of its leader while simultaneously deciding what to do with the infant now carrying a demon inside him. Nobody was thinking about the orphan boy who'd carried that infant to safety. Nobody except Biwako Sarutobi, who sat across from her husband in the ruins of the Hokage office 2 days later and described, in careful detail, a 6-year-old with no chakra signature lifting a beam that should have required a small team of Earth-style users to move. Certain, Hiruzen said, it wasn't really a question. His wife did not exaggerate. I'm certain there's something about that boy nobody has bothered to properly investigate, she said. Chakra-blind children don't exist, Hiruzen. Whatever he has instead, it isn't nothing. Third Hokage was a man who had buried a generation of students and watched his village burn twice in his lifetime. He did not believe in coincidences, and he especially did not believe that an unclaimed, unregistered, unchakrad child had appeared from nowhere 6 years prior and then happened to be strong enough to save 2 infants, one of them the vessel of the very beast that had just devastated the village on the single worst night in Konoha's history. Bring him in, Hiruzen said finally. Quietly, I want to see this for myself. The summons came the next morning in the form of 2 ANBU appearing on either side of Goku while he was, much to the annoyance of the orphanage matron, attempting to see how high he could jump by launching himself off the courtyard wall over and over, landing in a slightly deeper crater each time. Coming with us, the masked figure on his left said. It wasn't phrased as a request. Goku brightened immediately. Are you ninja real ones? Can you teach me a jutsu? I've been trying for years and I still can't do the transformation thing. Everyone says I'm broken, but I don't feel broken. I just feel, he paused, searching for the word. Strong, really strong. Is that weird? The 2 ANBU exchanged a glance neither of them would have admitted to if asked. They walked him not to the academy, not to a detention cell, but straight into the ruins of the Hokage's tower, past exhausted shinobi still clearing debris, into a private training yard sealed off from the rest of the village. Hiruzen Sarutobi was waiting there in his ceremonial robes, looking older than he had a week ago, flanked by 2 Jonin instructors and a Chunin holding a chakra sensing scroll. Goku, the old man said not unkindly. Do you know why you're here? No, Goku said honestly. But this place is really big. Are we gonna fight? One of the Jonin instructors, a broad-shouldered man named Abisu's predecessor, whose patience for unregistered chakra-blind orphans had run thin over 6 years of failed evaluations, stepped forward with something close to condescension. We're going to test you, he said. Properly this time. Show us what you did the night of the attack. Lift that boulder. He pointed to a granite block the size of a small cart, dragged into the yard specifically for this purpose. Even a mid-level Earth-style jutsu would struggle to move it cleanly. Goku tilted his head. That's it, okay. He walked over, planted his feet, and lifted it over his head in one motion, arms trembling not from strain but from barely restrained excitement, the warm fighting feeling in his gut flaring bright and hot, and alive in a way it hadn't since the night of the fire. The Chunin holding the sensor scroll made a strangled noise. Hokage-sama, his output just spiked. It's not chakra. I don't know what it is, but it's not chakra, it came from nowhere and it's already fatting. Hiruzen stepped closer, studying the boy over the top of the boulder still held aloft above his head, and felt something settle cold in his stomach, not fear exactly, but the specific unease of a man who has spent 70 years cataloging the ways the world can end and has just discovered a new one he hadn't accounted for. It down, Hiruzen said quietly. Goku set the boulder down gently like it weighed nothing at all and turned to the old man with the same open, guileless grin he'd worn since the ANBU first grabbed him. So, he said, am I gonna learn a jutsu now, or what? The third Hokage looked at this small, unregistered, impossible child, a boy who could lift a boulder no Chunin should be able to move, who carried the infant Jinchuriki to safety through burning streets, whose very presence had just made a scroll built by the Nara clan malfunction, and understood with the particular dread of a leader who has just found a new variable in an already unstable equation. That Konoha's list of problems had just gotten one entry longer. No, Hiruzen said slowly. Not today. Today you and I are going to have a very long talk. Somewhere across the village, in a nursery ward rebuilt from rubble, an infant named Naruto Uzumaki slept fitfully, alone, already carrying a burden no 6-year-old should bear, utterly unaware that the strange boy who'd carried him to safety 2 nights ago had just become the single most important variable in the rest of his life. The very long talk lasted 3 days. Hiruzen Sarutobi had interrogated missing Nin, negotiated with feudal lords, and once talked down a Jonin mid-mental breakdown after a botched mission. But nothing had prepared him for trying to extract useful information from a 6-year-old who answered every question about his abilities with variations of I dunno. It just happens, and every question about his origins with a shrug, so complete it seemed to encompass his entire worldview. Do you remember your parents? Nope. Do you remember anything before the orphanage? There was a lot of sky, Goku offered, brow furrowed in genuine effort. And I think I was really little and hungry. Is that helpful? It was not helpful. What Hiruzen eventually pieced together, through careful observation rather than interrogation, was this. The boy possessed no chakra network worth speaking of, and yet could generate raw physical force that scaled with effort, emotion, and something the Hawkage could only describe as asterisk will asterisk. It didn't behave like any bloodline limit on record. It didn't respond to chakra suppression seals because there was no chakra to suppress. When Goku pushed himself hard enough, his hair, jet black, perpetually disheveled, seemed to catch and hold static, like it had absorbed a lightning strike and hadn't let go. Whatever this was, it wasn't native to the elemental nations. Hiruzen had lived long enough and read enough sealed archives from the Sage of Six Paths era onward to recognize that some doors were better left unopened. He made a decision that would define the next decade of Goku's life. The boy would not be handed to Ibiki for deeper interrogation, would not be studied by root, would not be quietly disappeared into a research facility the way certain elements of the council no doubt wanted. He would be registered as a ward of the village, permitted into the academy on probationary terms, and watched closely. Not in trouble, Hiruzen told him on the third evening, crouching to meet the boy's eye level in a gesture that cost him something in his aching knees. But you're different, Goku. People are going to be afraid of that difference. Some of them might try to use it. I need you to understand that difference doesn't mean asterisk dangerous, and it doesn't mean alone asterisk. Do you understand? Goku considered this with more gravity than he'd shown the entire 3 days. Does that mean I still get to be a ninja? Hiruzen almost laughed, despite everything. Yes, it means you still get to be a ninja. Then I understand everything I need to, Goku said, grinning, and the old man felt, not for the last time, a strange mixture of relief and foreboding in the boy's presence, like standing near a bonfire that hadn't yet decided whether it wanted to warm you or burn the house down. The academy did not know what to do with him. Goku could not perform the transformation technique, the substitution technique, or the clone technique, the 3 pillars of the entire first-year curriculum, no matter how many times instructor Yumino's predecessor walked him through the hand seals. He simply had no chakra to mold. But he could outsprint every student in his year group across an obstacle course by a margin that made the instructors quietly recheck their stopwatches. And in unarmed sparring drills, no student his age or 2 years his senior could land a hit on him, though he never seemed to actually want to hurt anyone back. Mostly he just laughed, delighted, and asked them to go again. He's a taijutsu genius trapped in a ninjutsu curriculum, one exasperated instructor reported to the Hawkage. We don't have a category for him. Then make one, Hiruzen said simply. So they did, awkwardly, unofficially, cobbling together a training regimen heavier on physical conditioning and lighter on the theoretical chakra work that made up most of the curriculum. Goku thrived in it the way a fish thrives in water, and struggled genuinely and endearingly with almost everything else. He could not sit still through lectures on village history. He fell asleep during the ethics module on shinobi conduct not once but 4 separate times. He once asked with complete sincerity why shinobi didn't just settle village disputes by having their strongest fighters have a big match instead of a war, and was baffled into silence when the instructor explained, patiently, that the entire economic and political structure of the elemental nations didn't really allow for that. That seems like it'd be way less complicated, he muttered, and nobody in the room had a good rebuttal. He made no close friends in those early academy years. It wasn't that other children disliked him, mostly they were simply baffled by him, this cheerful, chakra-blind boy who could bench press a training dummy but couldn't tell you the name of the current fire daimyo. He drifted through his classes with the easy, oblivious contentment of someone who genuinely didn't register social exclusion as something worth being upset about. He had food, he had a place to sleep, and every so often the old Hawkage would visit and let him spar against an ANBU guard, which Goku considered roughly equivalent to a holiday. Then, 4 years after the Ninetales attack, a small, whisker-marked boy with a shock of blonde hair started at the academy, and every adult in Konoha who remembered whose son he was gave him exactly the kind of careful, distant, unwelcoming space that a village gives to a wound it doesn't want to look at directly. Goku had never learned to read a room. It was, in this one specific case, the single most useful skill he could have lacked. He first properly noticed Naruto Uzumaki on a Tuesday, 3 weeks into the younger boy's first academy term, sitting alone at the edge of the training yard while the rest of his class practiced the transformation technique in loose clusters, laughing and comparing results. Naruto sat by himself, knees drawn to his chest, watching the others with an expression that 10-year-old Goku, who by now had grown into a lean, restless boy with a habit of climbing anything that could be climbed, recognized instantly, because he'd worn it himself for years without ever having a word for it. Goku plopped down next to him without being invited. "You're not practicing." Naruto flinched like he'd been caught doing something wrong. "Nobody wants to practice with me," he muttered, and there was an old bitterness in a young voice, the kind that comes from years of doors quietly closing rather than one bad day. "That's dumb," Goku said with the particular bluntness of someone who'd never learned tact and never would. "I'll practice with you. You don't even know me, so I'm Goku." He said it like that settled the matter entirely, and in his mind it did. "What's your name?" "Naruto." "Okay, Naruto, show me the transformation thing." "I still can't do it, so you're already better than me at something. Which is kind of embarrassing for me if you think about it, but I don't really care." Naruto stared at him for a long moment, this strange, sun-browned boy 2 years his senior who apparently hadn't gotten the village-wide memo that Naruto Uzumaki was someone to be avoided. And something in his chest, guarded tight for as long as he could remember, cracked open just a hair. He performed the transformation technique. Badly, the resulting clone of the third Hokage had 6 fingers on one hand and a face that kept flickering between wrinkled and smooth. But Goku burst out laughing so hard he had to sit down, not cruelly, but with genuine, delighted surprise, the kind of laugh that made it impossible to feel humiliated alongside it. "That's amazing," Goku wheezed. "How do you even mess it up that specifically?" Do it again? Nobody had ever asked Naruto to do anything again like it was something worth seeing twice. He did it again. It went slightly better. Goku cheered like he'd witnessed an S-rank technique. That was, as far as either of them would ever be able to pin down later, the beginning. Word reached Hiruzen Sarutobi within the week, delivered by an amused Chunin instructor who'd watched the whole thing unfold. The strange chakra-blind ward of the village and the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki had become, seemingly overnight, inseparable. They ate lunch together. Goku, despite being older and technically a grade ahead in physical training, had started sitting in on Naruto's academic lectures just to be near him, promptly falling asleep in most of them anyway. When other children mocked Naruto, and some still did quietly, the way children absorb the unspoken prejudices of the adults around them, Goku had developed an alarming habit of hoisting the offending child a full foot off the ground by the back of their shirt and asking with total sincerity, "Why would you say something like that? That wasn't nice," which was somehow more unsettling to the bullies than an actual threat would have been. Hiruzen sat with this information for a long while, turning his pipe over in his weathered hands, and felt the first real ease he'd experienced regarding the boy since the night of the attack. He had spent 4 years worrying about what an ungoverned, incomprehensible power like Goku's might eventually be pointed toward. He had not considered that the answer might simply be asterisk loyalty to a lonely child, freely given, requiring no manipulation, no seals, no political maneuvering at all. It would have been the ideal outcome, if not for the fact that it made Goku a far more interesting variable to certain other parties than he'd been before. Danzo Shimura had been watching the chakra-blind boy since the week of his discovery, quietly, through root operatives too skilled to be noticed by anyone except perhaps Hiruzen himself, and even the third couldn't prove it. Danzo's interest was, as ever, purely strategic. A soldier who could generate that degree of physical force with no chakra network to disrupt, no genjutsu vulnerability through chakra sensing, no way to seal or suppress his abilities through any conventional method. That was not a resource a village at the edge of a fragile peace could afford to leave unclaimed. His initial approach, 18 months prior, had been indirect. A special aptitude program offered quietly to Hiruzen for gifted orphans with unconventional skill sets, which the third had declined without needing to state why. Danzo had not pushed further. He was a patient man, and patient men understood that a boy Goku's age, still forming his loyalties, was worth watching rather than rushing. The friendship with the Uzumaki boy changed the calculation. Danzo had never had any particular affection for Naruto, a liability wrapped around a weapon in his private estimation, the fox sealed inside a vessel too undisciplined to be trusted with it, but he recognized immediately what the bond represented. A being of unknown, possibly god-tier physical capability, anchored emotionally to the single most strategically valuable child in the village. If cultivated correctly, or failing that replaced correctly with Root's own conditioning, that anchor could become an extraordinarily useful lever. He raised it with Hiruzen directly in one of their increasingly tense private council sessions. Boy Goku should be reassigned to specialized training, Danzo said without preamble. His abilities are wasted on standard academy instruction and frankly wasted on companionship with the Jinchuriki. Root can shape that potential properly. Give him purpose, discipline. Has purpose, Hiruzen said evenly. He has friends, that is not something I intend to dismantle for the sake of your programs, Danzo. Sentiment, Danzo said, is a luxury this village cannot always afford. Sentiment, Hiruzen replied, is the only reason this village is worth defending in the first place. You do well to remember that before you try to carve it out of another child. The conversation ended, as most of their conversations did, in a stalemate neither man would forget. But Danzo did not abandon his interest. He simply redirected it toward a different kind of approach, one that didn't require Hiruzen's cooperation at all. It happened on an unremarkable afternoon 6 months later, when Goku, now 11, restless with an energy that Academy Taijutsu drills increasingly failed to burn off, was walking home alone after Naruto had been called in for a checkup at the hospital. The kind Naruto never explained and Goku never pushed him to. A man approached him at the edge of the training grounds, unremarkable in appearance, Chunin flak jacket worn with practiced casualness. You're the boy with no chakra, the man said not unkindly. I've heard about your strength. There's a training program advanced off the books, for children with exceptional potential the standard academy can't accommodate. I could take you to meet the instructor if you're interested. Goku considered this with the open curiosity that defined most of his decision-making. Program specifically for getting stronger sounded on its face appealing. Would Naruto get to come too? The man's expression flickered almost imperceptibly. This program is selective just for exceptional cases, like you, and there it was, the specific shape of the trap, one that would have worked on almost any other child flattered by the prospect of being singled out as special. But Goku had never particularly cared about being singled out. What he cared about, with the same simple, unshakable clarity he brought to everything, was the fighting feeling in his gut and the people who made him feel warm the way that feeling did. No thanks, he said, already turning to leave. If Naruto can't come, I'm not interested. You should think carefully before declining, the man said, something harder entering his voice now. Opportunities like this don't come twice. Goku paused, something in the man's tone, flat, faintly threatening, entirely unlike the easy warmth of the people he trusted, made the fighting feeling in his stomach shift just slightly from curiosity into something wary. Not actually asking, he said slowly, working it out in real time the way he worked out most things, through instinct rather than analysis. You're trying to get me to go somewhere without saying why. The man's hand moved subtly toward a kunai holster and stopped, because 11-year-old Goku had closed the 6 feet of distance between them in a blink, close enough that the man could feel displaced air against his face, and the boy's dark eyes held an intensity that had nothing childlike left in it at all. I don't know who you work for, Goku said, quiet and level in a way that unsettled the man far more than shouting would have. But if you're trying to take me somewhere Naruto isn't allowed to know about, I think you should probably leave. Right now. Man left. Whatever report he filed afterward, Danzo never made another direct approach. He simply filed the incident away alongside a growing private assessment. The boy could not be recruited through conventional means. He would need to be managed, contained, or if the Uzumaki bond ever became genuinely inconvenient, separated by other methods entirely. Goku told Hiruzen about the encounter that same evening, describing it with the same untroubled matter-of-factness he described everything, more curious about why someone would want to recruit him secretly than alarmed that they'd tried. Hiruzen listened, jaw tight, and understood, not for the first time and certainly not for the last, that protecting this boy's simple, uncomplicated loyalty might turn out to be one of the more complicated tasks of his final years as Hokage. That night, Goku found Naruto on the roof of his apartment building, staring up at a moon that had 6 years earlier watched a demon fox tear this village half apart. Up late, Goku said, dropping down beside him without invitation the way he always did. Couldn't sleep. Naruto didn't elaborate, and Goku for once didn't push. He'd learned, slowly and imperfectly, that some silences were meant to be sat in rather than filled. They stayed like that, a while, two boys who didn't quite fit the shapes the village had prepared for them, until Naruto finally spoke again, quiet in a way that had nothing to do with volume. Why do you hang out with me? Everyone else acts like, he stopped, swallowed. Like there's something wrong with me, but you never have, not once. Goku thought about this with more care than he gave almost anything because it mattered, and he could tell even without fully understanding why that it mattered enormously to the boy beside him. "I dunno," he said honestly. "I never thought there needed to be a reason. You were sitting alone and you shouldn't have been, that's it, that's the whole thing." Naruto stared at him, something bright and overwhelmed building behind his eyes that he blinked back hard, refusing to let fall in front of anyone, even Goku. "That's a stupid reason," he said, voice thick. "Probably," Goku agreed cheerfully. "I'm not really smart, but it's a reason I'm gonna keep having, so you're stuck with me." The first time in longer than either of them could measure, Naruto Uzumaki laughed, really laughed, unguarded and startled out of him. And somewhere in the quiet dark above Konoha, a bond neither the village council nor Root nor even the boys themselves fully understood yet had just settled into something that would not break, no matter how many people in the years ahead tried to bend it toward their own purposes. 5 years passed the way years do in a village that has learned to bury its scars under routine, not healed exactly, but scarred over enough to function. Goku was 16 now, broad-shouldered in a way that made his old academy instructors do a double-take when they passed him in the market. His black hair still perpetually disheveled no matter how many times the orphanage matron, retired now, though she still fussed over him like she hadn't been, tried to tame it. He had graduated the academy 2 years prior through a technicality Hiruzen had personally authorized. Since Goku could not perform the 3 basic jutsu required for genin certification, his graduation was instead based on a taijutsu and physical assessment so thoroughly one-sided that the examining Jonin had ended the test early out of what he'd later admit was simple embarrassment for the other candidates. He'd been placed on a genin team with 2 other chakra-capable graduates and a Jonin sensei who spent the first 6 months of their assignment quietly terrified of him before realizing that the boy who could crater a boulder with an open palm was, in every other respect, the least threatening person on the team, cheerful, uncomplicated, and prone to falling asleep during mission briefings with the specific ease of someone who genuinely could not manufacture anxiety about anything that wasn't an upcoming fight. Naruto, 14 now, had graduated the academy the year prior on his 3rd attempt, landing on Team 7 under Kakashi Hatake alongside Sasuke Uchiha and Sakura Haruno. And if the village had hoped that time and distance from Goku's day-to-day orbit might temper the bond between them, the village had badly misjudged the durability of a friendship built on the simple, unwavering fact of someone choosing to stay. They trained together whenever their schedules allowed it, which, as genin with increasingly demanding assignments, was less often than either of them liked, and made the time they did have together sharper for its scarcity. It was on one of these evenings, in a clearing on the training grounds long since claimed as unofficially theirs, that the difference in their philosophies of strength first became something worth nomming out loud. "Doing it wrong," Naruto announced, watching Goku plow through a set of one-armed push-ups with the kind of effortless intensity that made Naruto's own chakra-heavy training regimen feel almost decadent by comparison. "You don't even use jutsu. How are you gonna fight someone with a real bloodline limit if all you've got is muscles?" "Muscles have worked so far," Goku said, not even breathing hard. "That's not an answer." Goku stopped, considering the question with the seriousness he reserved for things that actually interested him, which increasingly included anything Naruto asked him. "I guess, I don't really think about it like jutsu versus no jutsu. I think about getting stronger than I was yesterday. If someone's got a technique I've never seen, that just means there's something new to figure out. That's exciting, not scary." "You say that because nothing scares you," Naruto muttered, not without a trace of envy. "Lots of things scare me," Goku said, surprising him. "Losing people scares me, not being strong enough when it matters scares me. I just don't think being scared should stop you from doing the thing anyway." Naruto turned that over for a long moment. This had become, over the years, a familiar rhythm between them. Naruto approaching strength as a ladder to be climbed rung by rung, technique by technique, validation by validation, while Goku approached it as something closer to weather, an internal force to be met and matched rather than accumulated. Naruto trained to prove something to the village, to the ghosts of parents he'd never known, to himself. Goku trained because the alternative to him simply didn't occur to him as a real option. "I want to be Hokage," Naruto said apropos of nothing, staring up at the darkening sky. "Everyone in the village to look at me and see somebody worth respecting instead of somebody to be scared of." "You'll get there," Goku said, with the same total, uncomplicated confidence he brought to predicting the outcome of a fight he hadn't started yet. "You're already the kind of person worth respecting." The title's just gonna catch up eventually. Naruto didn't have a response to that, he didn't need one. He just sat there in the settling dark, feeling something in his chest that he still didn't entirely have words for, the specific, foundational warmth of being believed in by someone who had never once needed a reason to. Their philosophical divergence sharpened publicly a few weeks later, when Team 7 and Goku's team were both assigned to a joint training exercise, a mock capture the scroll exercise meant to simulate a C-rank escort mission gone wrong. Run by two Jonin senseis eager to see how their students handled unpredictable variables, Sasuke Uchiha characteristically treated the exercise like a personal referendum on his own progress, activating his Tutamo sharing in the moment Goku was announced as the opposing team's designated threat to neutralize. "Heard about you," Sasuke said in the clipped, appraising tone he reserved for anyone he considered a potential yardstick. "The Hawkage ward with no chakra. I want to see what that actually means." "Sure," Goku said agreeably, entirely unbothered by the challenge in the other boy's voice. "Should be fun." It was not by any conventional measure a fair fight, a genin 2 years his junior however talented against a boy who could crater boulders, but Sasuke sharing in track movement with a precision that momentarily impressed even Goku, predicting the angle of his strikes half a beat before they landed, and adjusting just enough to avoid the worst of the damage. For nearly 90 seconds, Sasuke actually held his own, weaving fire jutsu with taijutsu redirection in a way that drew a low whistle of approval from the watching Jonin senseis. Then Goku, grinning, simply increased his output, not dramatically, just enough, and the exercise ended with Sasuke on his back in the dirt, scroll gone, the wind knocked fully out of him, staring up at the sky with the specific, furious humiliation of a prodigy who has just discovered the ceiling of prodigy is lower than he'd assumed. "Not even using chakra," Sasuke said when he could speak again, and there was something raw underneath the anger in his voice, the same hunger that had driven him since his family's massacre, the desperate need to find something, anything, capable of closing the gap between himself and the power he needed to fulfill his goals. "How is that possible? Show me how you did that." "I dunno if I can really explain it," Goku said honestly, extending a hand to help him up, which Sasuke ignored, pushing himself upright on his own. "It's not really a technique. It's more like pushing on something inside yourself until it pushes back harder. I don't think I could teach it even if I tried." "Then what good are you?" Sasuke snapped, more to himself than to Goku, storming off before the debrief had even properly started. Kakashi, watching the whole exchange with his single visible eye unreadable, made a note in his after-action report that would eventually cross several desks in the following weeks. Subject: Goku's abilities remain fundamentally non-instructable and non-transferable through observation. Recommend continued monitoring rather than attempted replication. Asterisk: he was not the only one making notes. The report reached Orochimaru roughly 3 weeks later, filtered through one of his many quiet informants embedded in Konoha's lower administrative ranks. A Jonin's after-action assessment was not, on its own, classified information worth the risk of extraction. But the specific phrase asterisk, fundamentally non-instructable asterisk, caught his attention the way a single loose thread catches the eye of someone who has spent a lifetime unraveling things others considered finished. Orochimaru had built his entire pursuit of power around the principle that any technique, any bloodline, any biological limit could eventually be understood, replicated, or stolen given sufficient study. It was the foundational conviction beneath every experiment, every stolen Kekkei Genkai grafted onto a hapless test subject, every cursed seal designed to force latent power to the surface. The idea of something fundamentally non-instructable, a power source that resisted analysis by its very nature, was, to a man like him, not a deterrent. It was the single most interesting problem he'd encountered in over a decade. He arranged, through channels too careful for even route to fully trace, to observe Goku directly, not through confrontation, which would have been reckless even by his standards this deep inside hostile territory, but through a carefully staged encounter during a joint mission near the border of the Land of Fire, where Goku's team had been assigned to investigate reports of bandit activity that were in truth a loosely orchestrated pretext. The bandits Orochimaru had hired for the purpose were disposable, unremarkable, Their only function was to draw Goku into combat long enough for their employer, watching from concealment a quarter-mile out with a sensory technique refined over decades, to properly study what happened to the boy's biology under combat stress. What he observed left even Orochimaru, a man who had personally witnessed and orchestrated horrors most shinobi would spend a lifetime trying to forget, genuinely unsettled. There was no chakra buildup preceding Goku's exertion. No hand seals, no tenketsu activation, no detectable transfer of energy through any of the pathways Orochimaru's decades of study had taught him to recognize as the fundamental grammar of all shinobi ability. Yet the boy's musculature responded to threat with an efficiency that bordered on the impossible, reaction speed accelerating mid-fight, in a way that should have required an entirely separate metabolic and neurological system to sustain hair lifting and crackling with faint static discharge during the fight's final exchange. Eyes flickering, for less than a full second, with a color Orochimaru had never once documented in 50 years of biological research. Asterisk not human, he thought. With the clinical fascination of a man for whom that classification had never carried moral weight, or not only human, something layered underneath, something the boy himself likely doesn't understand. Asterisk he withdrew before Goku's team completed their sweep of the area, already turning the problem over with the patient, obsessive focus that had made him one of the most dangerous minds in the shinobi world. A power source outside the entire framework of chakra. A physiology that didn't merely resist his usual methods of analysis, but seemed to actively defy the underlying rules his understanding of the world was built upon. He would need a sample. Blood, tissue, anything. And if direct extraction proved impossible given the boy's evident strength, there were other methods. Curse seals could be adapted. Genetic material could be studied indirectly through observation of stress responses, injury recovery rates, growth patterns. And should more direct means ever become necessary, Orochimaru had never particularly minded getting his own hands dirty, when the prize was worth it. Asterisk whatever you are, asterisk he thought, watching Goku's distant figure disappear back toward Konoha's border, laughing at something one of his teammates had said, entirely oblivious to how closely he'd just been studied. You may be the single most valuable specimen I've encountered in my life. And Konoha has no idea what it's sitting on, asterisk. The bandit incident reached Hiruzen's desk within the week, flagged not for its outcome, a clean, unremarkable victory for Goku's team, but for an anomaly one of the team's own members had reported. A lingering, unfamiliar chakra signature detected at the fight's periphery, present before the engagement and gone within moments of its conclusion, too controlled and too precisely masked to belong to any wandering civilian or opportunistic scavenger. Hiruzen had spent enough decades reading the shape of Orochimaru's absence in situations like this to recognize it immediately, even without confirmation. He summoned Goku to his office that same evening, not with the gentle, patient tone of their earliest conversations years ago, but with the graver weight of a hawkage delivering information a young shinobi needed to survive. "There's a man," Hiruzen said, once Goku had settled into the chair across from his desk, "who I believe was observing you during your last mission. His name is Orochimaru. He was once one of my own students, one of the most gifted shinobi this village has ever produced, and one of the most dangerous men currently alive in the elemental nations." Goku's easy, restless energy stilled just slightly. "Dangerous how?" "He experiments," Hiruzen said, choosing the word with the same care he'd used to defuse an explosive. "On people, on bloodlines. On anything he believes might expand the boundaries of what's biologically possible, regardless of the cost to the person he's experimenting on. If he's taken an interest in you, and I believe he has, it will not be an interest that ends with polite conversation. You think he wants to hurt me? I think," Hiruzen said, "that to a man like Orochimaru, you represent the single most interesting scientific mystery he has encountered in years. And men like him do not distinguish between hurting you and studying you the way you or I would." Goku sat with that for a long moment, the fighting feeling in his gut settling into something colder and more focused than his usual eagerness, not fear, not quite, but a wariness that had crystallized over the years into genuine understanding of what it meant to be a target rather than simply a curiosity. Naruto know about him? Team 7 has been briefed on Orochimaru as a known threat to the village, yes, though not, Hiruzen added, on the specific nature of his interest in you. I'd prefer that information stay contained for now to limit unnecessary panic. "I want to tell him," Goku said, with the same simple, immovable certainty he brought to most decisions concerning Naruto. If someone's after me and it could put him in danger just for being close to me, he deserves to know that. I'm not gonna keep secrets from him just because it's easier. Studied the boy across from him for a long moment, 16 years old, powerful beyond any conventional shinobi classification, and still after everything fundamentally incapable of the kind of practiced deception that defines so much of the profession he'd been raised into. That instinct, the old man said finally, the refusal to lie to the people you care about, even when a lie would be easier, it's rare in this line of work. Rarer than your strength, honestly. Don't let anyone talk you out of it. Goku grinned, some of the tension easing out of his shoulders. Wasn't planning to, he told Naruto that same night, sitting on the same rooftop where they'd first properly talked years earlier, laying out everything Hiruzen had shared without softening any of it, Orochimaru's reputation, the bandit ambush, the unfamiliar chakra signature that had been watching him fight. Naruto listened in silence, jaw tightening with every new detail until Goku finished and the two of them sat there in the quiet aftermath of it. You should have told me sooner, Naruto said finally, not accusatory, just tired in a way that made him sound older than 14. Found out myself an hour before I told you, Goku said. Didn't want to sit on it. That's not what I mean. Naruto pulled his knees up to his chest, the old, familiar gesture from years ago when he'd sat alone at the edge of a training yard nobody wanted to share with him. I mean, you're the strongest person I've ever met. If someone like that is willing to come after you what does that mean for the rest of us? What does it mean for the village? It was, Goku realized, the first time Naruto had ever voiced something close to fear on his behalf rather than the other way around, and something in that recognition settled heavy and warm in his chest at the same time. It means, Goku said slowly, working it out as he spoke, that we watch each other's backs. Like always, I'm not gonna stop being your friend just because someone dangerous is watching me. And I'm definitely not gonna let him get anywhere near you to find out if his interest extends that far. Naruto managed a small, tired smile. You say that like it's simple. Things are if you don't overthink them, Goku said, bumping his shoulder against Naruto's. Orochimaru wants to study me. Fine, let him watch. He's gonna learn pretty fast that whatever I am, I'm not something that gets taken from the people I care about. Not without one hell of a fight first. Above them, the same moon that had watched the Nine Tails tear through the village a decade earlier hung quiet and pale over Konoha's rooftops, indifferent witness to two boys, one carrying a demon sealed inside him, and the other carrying a power neither of them fully understood, both of them in that moment, simply choosing each other over every danger circling closer with each passing year. Neither of them could yet know how soon that choice would be tested, nor that the shadow now watching Goku from the darkness was far from the only power in the world beginning to take an interest in a boy who did not belong to this universe at all. The mission that changed everything began, as most disasters in the shinobi world did, as something routine. Team 7, Naruto, Sasuke, Sakura, and Kakashi, had been dispatched alongside Goku's team on a joint reconnaissance assignment near the border of the Land of Rivers, investigating reports of unusual seismic activity that Konoha's analysts suspected might indicate an unauthorized excavation of an old Uzumaki-era sealing site. It was meant to be a 2-day mission. Assess, report, return. It became something else entirely on the second night, when a ripple of malevolent chakra so dense it registered on sensory equipment 3 villages away tore through the forest canopy like a physical force, and both teams converged on the source to find a scene that none of their combined training had prepared them for. A rogue faction, later identified as remnants of a defunct organization with ties to the original Akatsuki's earliest, less coordinated iterations, had captured a Jinchuriki. Not from Konoha, the boy, barely older than Naruto, belonged to a small, isolated village in the Land of Rivers that had gone largely unnoticed by the larger shinobi powers precisely because it guarded its tailed beast so quietly. The extraction ritual was already underway when the two teams arrived, a crude, unstable process, cruder than anything the true Akatsuki would have sanctioned, and precisely because of that crudeness, catastrophically dangerous. That's a partial extraction, Kakashi said grimly, taking in the scene, the boy suspended in a chakra containment array crackling with barely controlled energy, 4 masked figures maintaining the ritual with visible strain, the air itself thick with a pressure that made even Sasuke's sharing and enhanced perception waver. If they don't stop or if we interrupt it wrong, the beast doesn't get extracted cleanly. It gets released, uncontrolled. What happens then? Sakura asked, though something in her voice suggested she already suspected the answer. Then we're looking at a tailed beast with no seal, no host, no restraint of any kind, Kakashi said. In the middle of a forest a day's travel from 3 separate villages. Naruto's hands had already curled into fists, his own chakra tinged faintly with the fox's own reddish hue when his emotions ran hot enough, beginning to stir beneath his skin in involuntary sympathy. We have to stop them. Now. Agreed, Goku said, already moving, the fighting feeling in his gut roaring to life with an intensity he hadn't felt since childhood, not eagerness this time, but something sharper, more urgent, the recognition of a situation where every second mattered. He hit the containment array's outer perimeter before either sensei could issue a coordinated plan, which would become, in the after-action reports filed weeks later, both the single most decisive factor in the mission's ultimate success and the single most reckless decision anyone present had ever witnessed him make. The 4 masked extractors were not, individually, anywhere near Goku's level. But the ritual they maintained had been stabilized precisely, because interrupting it required either overwhelming force applied with surgical precision, or a level of chakra sensitivity that could identify and sever the ritual's anchor points without triggering the catastrophic release Kakashi had warned against. Goku had neither chakra sensitivity nor any particular interest in surgical precision. What he had was speed, force, and an instinct that had never once required him to understand a technique before disrupting it. He put the first extractor through a tree before the man had time to register an attacker had arrived. The second turned, already forming hand seals for a retaliatory jutsu, and found Goku's fist arriving faster than the technique could complete. A blow that didn't merely knock the man unconscious but visibly disrupted the chakra thread he'd been channeling into the containment array, causing the entire structure to flicker and destabilize. "Goku, wait!" Kakashi called, too late, already sprinting to close the distance, because a destabilized extraction ritual was, if anything, more dangerous than a completed one. The array's containment field shattered. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened the held breath before a dam breaks. Then the young Jinchuriki's body convulsed, the seal keeping his tailed beast contained wrenched loose by the ritual's violent interruption, and a surge of raw, unchanneled chakra erupted outward with enough force to flat every tree within 100 yards, the boy's form beginning to distend and darken as something ancient and furious began clawing its way to the surface with no seal left to restrain it. "It's coming out," Sakura shouted, dragging Sasuke back from the shockwave's edge. "Kakashi-sensei, what do we—" "Everyone back now," Kakashi ordered, already forming hand seals for a defensive technique that both of them knew, privately, would be nowhere near sufficient if the beast fully emerged. "This isn't something a genin team is equipped to." He didn't finish the sentence because Naruto had already broken from the group, sprinting directly toward the boy convulsing at the center of the collapsing ritual site, not toward safety, but toward the one person in that clearing who understood, more intimately than anyone else present, exactly what it felt like to have a demon clawing at the inside of your own body with nowhere left to go. "Naruto, get back here," Sakura screamed. He didn't listen. He never really had when it mattered. Goku reached the boy at nearly the same moment Naruto did, the two of them converging on a kneeling, thrashing figure whose skin had begun to split along fault lines of raw chakra, 4 indistinct tails of writhing energy already tearing free of his back, features distorting into something that was rapidly losing the shape of anything human, away from him. Kakashi shouted, close now but not close enough, watching in real time as 2 of his most important students placed themselves directly in the path of an uncontrolled tailed beast emergence. "He's still in there," Naruto said, more to himself than to anyone listening, dropping to one knee in front of the transforming boy despite every screamed instinct in his body telling him to run. "I can feel it, he's still fighting it, he doesn't know how to hold on." "How do you know that?" Goku asked, already moving to Naruto's side rather than away from him, some instinct telling him that wherever Naruto planted himself, that was where he needed to be too. "Because I know what it feels like," Naruto said, quiet and raw, "to have something huge and furious inside you and not know if you're strong enough to keep it from taking over." The boy's half-transformed face turned toward them, one eye still human, wide and terrified, the other already swallowed by a slitted feral yellow, and in that fractured, agonized expression Naruto saw something he recognized down to his bones. "Hey," Naruto said, voice steadying with a conviction that surprised even him, kneeling close enough that the boy's ragged chakra-hot breath washed over his face. "Listen to me, it doesn't get to win, you hear me? Whatever it's telling you right now, that you're not strong enough, that it's easier to just let go, that's a lie. I've heard that lie 100 times, it's always a lie." "I can't," the boy managed, voice fracturing between human and something else entirely. "It's too strong, I can't hold." "You don't have to hold it alone," Goku said, stepping forward, and though he had no idea technically what he was about to attempt, no framework of sealing theory, no chakra-based method for stabilizing a Jinchuriki mid-transformation, he understood on the same instinctive level that had guided every major decision of his life, that this was a fight. And fights were things he knew how to help with. He placed both hands on the boy's shoulders, an act that should have been suicidal, given the raw, destabilized chakra rolling off him in visible waves, chakra dense enough to have already begun scorching the ground where it touched, and simply held on, grounding him with sheer, stubborn physical presence, the same unyielding strength he'd once used to lift a support beam off a dying woman a decade earlier. "Not gonna fall," Goku said, quiet and absolutely certain. "I've got you, both of us do." Something in the boy, whether it was the physical anchor or Naruto's raw, hard-won empathy, or simply the sheer improbable fact that two strangers had thrown themselves directly into the path of his unraveling to keep him from disappearing, caught and held. The chakra roiling around him began, gradually, to recede back beneath his skin, tails dissolving one by one, the feral yellow bleeding slowly back into something human and exhausted and disbelieving. The clearing fell into a ringing, debris-strewn silence. Kakashi arrived a beat too late to have done anything except watch two Genin succeed at something that, by every technical framework he understood, should not have been possible without a trained sealing specialist and hours of preparation. The masked extractors who hadn't been incapacitated in the initial chaos fled rather than risk engaging a team that had just demonstrated it could stop a tailed beast release with bare hands and stubbornness. But the mission's true complications began only after the immediate crisis had passed. The boy, his name, they learned once he'd recovered enough to speak, was Ren, Jinchuriki to a four-tailed beast his own tiny village had guarded in near-total secrecy for generations, was in no condition to be moved without proper medical attention, and his village, once located and contacted, arrived within hours in a state of barely restrained panic. Their most closely guarded secret had nearly been stolen out from under them by a faction they hadn't even known was tracking them, saved only by the intervention of shinobi from a village they had spent generations deliberately avoiding entanglement with. "You understand what you've done," the elder who led Ren's small delegation said to Kakashi, once the initial relief had settled into something wearier and more complicated. "Our village has survived this long specifically by staying unknown to the larger powers. Konoha, Kiri, Suna, all of you we've avoided, because a Jinchuriki known to a major village becomes a Jinchuriki eventually claimed by one, whether through alliance or through force. And now 4 of your genin know exactly what we are and exactly where to find us. We're not here to claim anything," Kakashi said carefully, aware of exactly how precarious this conversation had suddenly become. "Your village's sovereignty isn't in question, but you should also understand the faction that attacked you tonight isn't going to simply give up because their first attempt failed. If they've identified Ren as a target, they'll return, likely with greater numbers next time." Elder's expression tightened, because he knew with the particular exhaustion of someone who had spent a lifetime holding a secret together with insufficient resources, that Kakashi was right. It was Naruto, still sitting beside a recovering Ren, who spoke next, not with any particular diplomatic training, but with the same blunt honesty that had defined his entire relationship with Goku for the past decade. "You don't have to trust the whole village," Naruto said. "You don't even have to trust us, really, not yet." But Ren almost lost himself tonight, and the only reason he didn't is that 2 people who'd never met him decided that mattered enough to risk their own lives over it. That's not a village doing calculations about strategic advantage. That's just people showing up for each other. I think that's worth something, even between villages that don't trust each other. Elder studied him for a long moment, a boy who, unbeknownst to him, carried the exact same burden Ren did, speaking with a conviction that came from somewhere far more personal than diplomatic training. "And what would you propose instead?" the elder asked, not dismissively but genuinely curious. "An informal arrangement," Kakashi said, picking up the thread with the practiced ease of a jonin who'd spent years navigating exactly this kind of delicate territory. Not an alliance in any official capacity, nothing that would put your village on record as bound to Konoha, but an understanding. If this faction returns or if any other threat targets Ren specifically because of what he carries, Konoha extends assistance. Quietly, on your terms, not ours. It was, in the weeks that followed, a genuinely unusual arrangement, one that made several members of Konoha's council distinctly uncomfortable when Kakashi's report crossed their desks, given how thoroughly it deviated from the standard playbook of formal alliances and negotiated tribute. Danzo, predictably, argued that the situation should have been leveraged into direct Konoha oversight of Ren's village and its tailed beast, a resource too valuable to be left under an informal handshake agreement. Hiruzen, reading the same report, found himself lingering longest not on the tactical outcome, but on a single line buried in Kakashi's after-action notes. The de-escalation with Ren's village elder was achieved primarily through Naruto Uzumaki's direct appeal, supported by the demonstrated willingness of both Naruto and Goku to risk their lives for a Jinchuriki they had never previously met, without any prompting or strategic calculation on either boy's part. He set the report down and allowed himself, for the first time in longer than he could remember, something close to genuine hope regarding the future those two boys might build for the village. If the village could only manage to get out of its own way long enough to let them. Ren recovered fully within the week, and before Team 7 and Goku's team departed for Konoha, he sought Naruto out alone, finding him at the edge of his small village's boundary, watching the sunset with the specific restlessness of someone still processing how close a disaster had come. I wanted to say thank you properly, Ren said, not just for stopping the extraction, for the other thing, talking me back. You did the hard part, Naruto said. I just told you what I needed to hear myself back when I was in a similar spot. Didn't have anyone to say it to me at the time, so figured I'd pass it along. Ren was quiet a moment. Does it get easier? Living with it, Naruto thought about Goku, about a strange, chakra-blind boy who'd sat down next to a lonely kid at the edge of a training yard years ago and simply decided with no ulterior motive at all that Naruto shouldn't have to sit alone. It gets easier when you're not carrying it by yourself, Naruto said. Find people who show up for you, doesn't have to be a lot of them, just needs to be real. That night, camped a half-day's travel from Konoha, Goku found Naruto sitting apart from the rest of the group, staring into the low fire with an expression more contemplative than his usual restless energy. You did something back there I couldn't have, Goku said, settling down beside him. The talking him back from the edge thing, I just held on tight and hoped for the best. You actually knew what to say. Only knew because of everything I've been through with the fox, Naruto admitted. It's not exactly a skill I wanted to have to learn. Doesn't matter how you learned it, Goku said. Matters that you used it to save someone. That's the whole thing, right? Doesn't matter if the strength comes from muscles or chakra or whatever stuck inside you that you didn't ask for. What matters is what you do with it when someone needs you to. Naruto managed a small, tired smile, the firelight catching the whisker marks on his cheeks. You ever think about how different tonight could have gone? If you hadn't rushed in like an idiot with zero plan? Nope, Goku said cheerfully. Didn't have time to think about it, just moved. That's gonna get you killed someday. Maybe, Goku agreed, entirely unbothered by the prospect. But it saves someone tonight, I'll take that trade every time. Naruto looked at him for a long moment, this boy who had, without ever fully understanding the shape of the world he'd been reborn into, become the single most stable, unshakable presence in Naruto's entire life, and felt something settle in his chest that he still didn't have adequate words for even after all these years. Yeah, he said finally, quiet. Yeah, I guess you would. Neither of them could have known in that quiet firelit moment that word of a chakraless boy capable of single-handedly disrupting a Jinchuriki extraction ritual, of physically restraining a partially released tailed beast with nothing but bare hands and stubborn will, had already begun traveling through channels far beyond the small, isolated village they'd just left behind. Word that would, in the months ahead, reach ears far older and far more dangerous than Orochimaru's, in places that existed at the very edge of what the elemental nations understood to be possible at all. Somewhere in a dimension layered just beyond the world Naruto and Goku called home, something ancient had felt a ripple in the fabric of reality it considered its exclusive domain, a power that did not belong, using itself in ways that echoed with an energy signature no Otsutsuki Saiyan had cataloged in this world before, and it had begun patiently to take notice. The first sign that something had gone fundamentally wrong with the natural order of things arrived not as an attack, but as an absence. It began 3 weeks after Team 7's return from the Land of Rivers, when a routine border patrol near Konoha's northern perimeter reported an entire clearing, nearly 2 acres of old-growth forest reduced to ash and bare, scorched earth overnight, with no fire jutsu signature, no explosive tag residue, and no chakra trace of any kind detectable by even the village's most sensitive trackers. Plants within a 50-yard radius beyond the scorch zone had wilted and browned, as though the very life had been siphoned out of the soil itself. Inochi Yamanaka, called in to consult on the anomaly, spent 3 hours examining the site and came away with nothing but a headache and a single unsettling observation. The ash at the clearing center didn't behave like normal ash. It shimmered faintly under direct moonlight, in a way that made his stomach turn without being able to articulate why. "It's not a jutsu," he reported to Hiruzen. "Or if it is, it's not built on chakra at all. There's a resonance to the area Hokage-sama, something that feels less like a technique and more like a wound in the world itself." Hiruzen had lived long enough and studied enough sealed clan archives to recognize the particular chill that settled over him at those words. There was exactly one category of threat in recorded shinobi history that fit that description, and it predated every ninja village, every bloodline limit, every war the elemental nations had ever fought. He summoned the few scrolls in Konoha's most restricted archive that referenced the Otsutsuki by name, ancient fragmentary records dating back to the era of the Sage of Six Paths himself, describing a celestial clan that had once harvested entire worlds of their chakra-bearing trees, treating the elemental nations itself as a resource to be cultivated and consumed rather than a home to be respected. The sage had driven them off, according to legend, sealing the threat away so thoroughly that most modern shinobi considered the Otsutsuki little more than a bedtime story told to frighten academy students into taking their sealing theory lessons seriously. Hiruzen did not believe in bedtime stories. He believed in patterns, and the pattern forming now an inexplicable energy signature, a localized devastation that mimicked nothing in recorded jutsu history, occurring less than a month after a chakraless boy had publicly demonstrated an ability to physically overpower a tailed beast chakra with his bare hands, was not a pattern he could afford to dismiss. The Otsutsuki who had noticed the disturbance called himself, in the old tongue his clan still used among themselves, Kaguro. A scion of a minor branch family, centuries removed from the clan's ruling line, but no less attuned to the particular resonance his people had spent millennia learning to detect. The presence of chakra-adjacent power that did not originate from their carefully cultivated harvest trees. He had felt at first as a distant ripple months earlier, easy to dismiss as background noise in a world his clan had already thoroughly cataloged. But the disruption at the extraction site in the Land of Rivers had been unmistakable, a burst of raw, undeniable force, applied with a physicality that had nothing to do with chakra manipulation and everything to do with something his people recognized instinctively, even across dimensional barriers as foreign asterisk. Kaguro had traveled to this world through methods his clan had perfected long before the Sage of Six Paths was ever born. Dimensional apertures torn through the fabric between realities, a technique so far beyond conventional shinobi understanding that even Konoha's most gifted spacetime specialists would have struggled to detect his passage. He arrived not as a conqueror, not yet, but as a scout, patient, methodical, and utterly convinced of his clan's inherent right to assess, and if warranted, reclaim any resource that threatened the delicate balance of a world they still considered, on some fundamental level, theirs. The scorched clearing had been an experiment, a deliberate provocation, designed to draw out whatever had produced the anomalous energy signature he'd traced to this region. He'd expected, based on centuries of study into how power responded to threat in worlds like this one, that something would come to investigate. He had not expected a teenage boy to simply walk into the clearing 3 nights later, entirely unaccompanied, following nothing more sophisticated than his own restless curiosity about the weird burned spot he'd overheard 2 chunin discussing in a tea house. Goku had not been assigned to investigate the anomaly. That had been the point as far as Hiruzen was concerned. The Hokage had deliberately kept him away from the site, uncertain what connection, if any, existed between the scorched clearing and Goku's own inexplicable nature. Unwilling to risk exposing the boy to a threat nobody yet understood, Goku characteristically had never been especially good at staying where he was told to stay when something interesting was happening nearby. He found the clearing at dusk, and even without Inoichi's trained sensory abilities, something in him, the same deep, wordless instinct that had always guided his understanding of strength and danger, recognized immediately that this was not an ordinary place. The air itself felt wrong, thin and metallic, the fighting feeling in his gut stirring not with its usual eager anticipation, but with something closer to genuine unease. "You can come out," he said aloud to the empty clearing with the same easy confidence he brought to every confrontation. "I can tell someone's here. You're not exactly hiding great." Kaguro emerged from a fold in the air itself, not stepping out from behind a tree or dropping from a branch, but simply becoming visible, as though he'd been standing in the same spot the entire time and had merely chosen, until now, not to be perceived. He was tall, pale, dressed in robes that belonged to no clan or village Goku had ever encountered, with eyes that held an ancient, calculating patience entirely at odds with his otherwise youthful appearance. "Interesting," Kaguro said, studying him with open, clinical curiosity. "You sense my presence without any chakra-based sensory technique. That in itself confirms a great deal. You're the one who did this?" Goku asked, gesturing at the blighted clearing, wariness sharpening in his voice. "A minor test," Kaguro said, unbothered, "to confirm what I already suspected. You are not native to this world, boy. I can smell it on you, an energy signature that does not belong to any tree my clan has ever cultivated in this reality or any other we've cataloged. Tell me, do you even know what you are?" Goku's jaw tightened, the fighting feeling in his gut sharpening into something wary and alert. "I know I'm someone who's about to ask you to leave if you're the kind of person who burns down forests just to run tests." Kaguro's expression flickered with something almost like amusement. "Direct, uncomplicated. It's rather refreshing, honestly, compared to the endless political maneuvering your species seems to favor." He tilted his head, studying Goku with renewed intensity. "You truly don't know, do you, what you are? Where you came from? My clan has harvested chakra from worlds like this one since before your Sage of Six Paths was a wandering monk's fantasy. We understand power in ways your kind cannot fathom, and I am telling you with absolute certainty that whatever produced you was not born of this world's chakra tree. You are an intrusion, a variable that does not belong in the equation." "Don't know what any of that means," Goku said, "and honestly, I don't really care. I know I was born or reborn or whatever happened, and I grew up here, and this is my home now. The people here are my people, so whatever you're planning to do about that intrusion thing, you should probably reconsider it. Loyalty to a world you don't even belong to," Kaguro mused, circling him slowly, the air around him beginning to hum faintly with a pressure that made the surrounding trees creak and groan under a weight that had nothing to do with wind. "Admirable in its way. Foolish, but admirable. Very well, let us see if that loyalty holds up against a proper demonstration of what my clan actually is." He moved. Goku had fought countless opponents in his life, Jonin instructors, rogue shinobi, even in one memorable academy incident, an actual small bear that had wandered too close to the training grounds, and every single one of those fights had followed a comprehensible logic. Strength against strength, speed against speed, strategy meeting counter-strategy. Kaguro's attack followed no such logic. He simply was asterisk somewhere he hadn't been a half-second earlier, a palm strike arriving from an angle that shouldn't have been physically possible given his prior position, carrying a force behind it that made the fighting feeling in Goku's gut flare white-hot in genuine unfamiliar alarm. He blocked it. Barely. The impact sent him skidding backward through a dozen feet of scorched earth, arms numb to the shoulder from the force he'd just absorbed. "There it is," Kaguro said, something like genuine interest entering his voice for the first time. "That reaction, that's not chakra reinforcement. That's something else entirely, something my clan has a very specific name for, though I doubt the word would mean anything to you yet." Goku shook the numbness from his arms, planting his feet, the fighting feeling in his gut no longer merely alert but beginning to build the familiar coiled pressure of a fight that demanded more than he'd been giving. "Don't know what you're talking about," he said, "but I know I'm not done yet," he pushed. It happened the way it always had, in moments of sufficient need, not a technique he consciously activated, but a threshold he crossed, the fighting feeling in his gut igniting into something incandescent, hair lifting and crackling with static that built this time into something more. A golden light beginning to bleed through his dark hair strand by strand, the ground beneath his feet cracking under a sudden surge of pressure that hadn't been there a moment earlier. Kaguro's eyes widened, the first genuine crack in his composed, clinical demeanor since the encounter began. "That signature," he breathed, taking an involuntary step back. That is not merely foreign, that is, he stopped himself, recalculating something behind his ancient eyes with visible urgency. You truly don't understand what you're carrying, do you? That transformation. I've encountered its resonance in exactly one other context, in one other world, in all the millennia my clan has harvested across the plains. Goku, hair now fully gold, eyes a piercing teal that held none of their usual warmth, stood in a stance that felt, for the first time since his rebirth, entirely and completely himself, as though some deep, submerged part of his identity had finally surfaced to answer a threat worthy of it. Don't know, don't care, he said, voice steady despite the raw power now humming through every inch of him. You attacked my home, that's all I need to know. He closed the distance before Kaguro could react, and for the first time in the encounter, it was the Otsutsuki Saiyan who found himself on the defensive, blocking, dodging, his ancient techniques and dimensional manipulation abilities suddenly, genuinely tested by a force he had badly, catastrophically underestimated. Goku's strikes came faster now, each one carrying enough raw power to splinter the air itself, and Kaguro, for all his centuries of accumulated knowledge, found that knowledge offered surprisingly little defense against an opponent who fought with nothing resembling the calculated, chakra-based logic his entire framework of understanding had been built around. Blow finally landed, clean, devastating, sending Kaguro through the trunk of an ancient oak, and skidding another 30 feet before he managed to arrest his momentum, robes scorched, composure thoroughly shattered. He rose slowly, blood at the corner of his mouth, staring at Goku with an expression that had shifted entirely from clinical curiosity to something far more calculating. This changes the assessment considerably, Kaguro said, voice tight with barely controlled urgency. I came here to evaluate a curiosity. I am leaving having identified a genuine variable, one my clan will need to address with considerably more resources than a single scout. He straightened, robes settling despite the damage, already reaching for the fold in space he'd emerged from at the encounter's start. You should know, boy, before I go, my clan does not tolerate loose ends. And you, whatever you are, whatever brought you to this world, have just become the largest loose end my people have encountered in generations. Then bring your whole clan, Goku said, still radiant with gold light, entirely unafraid. I'll be ready. Kaguro's expression for just a moment held something that might have been reluctant respect. I believe you actually will be, he said, which is precisely the problem. He vanished into the fold of space, leaving Goku alone in the scorched, cratered clearing, gold light slowly fading from his hair as the transformation released, exhaustion crashing over him in a wave that made his knees buckle for the first time in longer than he could remember. He'd won. But something in Kaguro's parting words, my clan does not tolerate loose ends, settled cold and heavy in his stomach, a dread that had nothing to do with his own safety and everything to do with the people he'd sworn years ago on a rooftop to protect. He told Hiruzen everything that same night, the scorched clearing, the being who called himself Kaguro, the casual, ancient certainty with which he'd spoken of harvesting worlds like this one, the golden transformation that had surfaced, unbidden, in response to a threat greater than anything Goku had faced before. Hiruzen listened in grim, mounting silence, and when Goku finished, the old man sat back in his chair with the specific, weary heaviness of a leader confronting a threat that dwarfed every framework his decades of experience had prepared him for. Otsutsuki, Hiruzen said quietly. I'd hoped honestly that they were exactly what most of this village believes them to be, a myth, a cautionary tale from an era so distant it no longer had teeth. I should have known better. Threats like that rarely stay buried forever. Said I don't belong here, Goku said, quieter than Hiruzen had heard him in years. That whatever brought me to this world was an intrusion, that his people are gonna come back with more of them because of what I am. He looked up, and for the first time since Hiruzen had known him, something like genuine fear had crept into the boy's expression, not for himself, but for the shape of what his presence might cost the people around him. What if he's right? What if I brought this on everyone just by being here? Hiruzen was quiet for a long moment, choosing his next words with the care of a man who understood exactly how much weight they would carry. You did not choose to be reborn into this world, Goku, he said finally. You did not choose whatever force brought you here, or whatever ancient rivalry exists between your nature and this Otsutsuki clan. But you have chosen, every single day since you arrived, what to do with the power you were given. You chose to carry 2 infants to safety through a burning village. You chose to befriend a lonely child nobody else in Konoha would sit beside. You chose tonight to stand between this village and a threat that could have simply walked past you and continued its scouting unchallenged. Whatever brought you here, boy, you have more than earned your place in this world through everything you've done since. Don't let one arrogant scion of an ancient clan convince you otherwise. Goku absorbed this in silence, something in his chest loosening slightly at words he hadn't fully realized he needed to hear. "If they come back," he said finally, "if there's more of them, I'm not gonna be able to protect the village on my own. Not against something like that, not if it's more of them at once." "Then it's fortunate," Hiruzen said, "that you have never once in the entire time I've known you tried to protect this village alone." Naruto found him an hour later, sitting on the same rooftop that had witnessed a decade of their friendship's most important moments, staring up at a sky that suddenly felt considerably less safe than it had the week before. "Heard you had a rough night," Naruto said, settling down beside him without needing an invitation, the way he never had since that first day at the academy. "You could say that." Goku recounted the encounter again, Kaguro, the golden transformation, the ominous warning about a clan that considered this entire world theirs to harvest, and Naruto listened with the same fierce, focused attention he'd given every crisis they'd faced together over the years. "So there's a whole clan of god-tier beings out there," Naruto said slowly once Goku had finished, "and they think you're some kind of threat to their farming operation, basically. You're worried that's your fault, that you brought this on everyone." Goku didn't answer, which was answer enough. "Here's what I think," Naruto said, bumping his shoulder against Goku's with the same casual, grounding gesture Goku had used on him 100 times over the years. "I think you've spent this whole night blaming yourself for existing, and I think that's exactly as stupid now as it would have been if I'd spent my whole life blaming myself for having the fox sealed inside me instead of choosing to actually do something with it. It's not the same thing. It's exactly the same thing," Naruto said firmly. "Neither of us chose what we were born carrying, but we both chose what we did with it. You chose to protect people. That doesn't stop being true just because something ancient and powerful decided to take issue with it." He looked over at Goku, something steady and unshakable in his expression. "Whatever's coming, whatever this clan sends next, you're not facing it alone. I don't care how strong they are, I don't care what they think they're owed from this world. You've spent 10 years showing up for me, for this village, for people you never even met before. It's about time some of us started showing up for you." Goku looked at him for a long moment, the fighting feeling in his gut settling, for the first time since the encounter with Kaguro, into something warm rather than wary. "Gonna get yourself killed trying to fight something on my level," he said, but there was no real argument left in his voice. "Probably," Naruto agreed, echoing without realizing it the exact words Goku had once used to describe his own recklessness. "Guess we'll find out together." Above them, the sky remained deceptively calm, no sign yet of the storm that Kaguro's report would soon set in motion. Deep within a dimension the elemental nations had spent centuries convincing itself no longer posed any real threat. But in the quiet space between two friends on a rooftop, something had solidified that no ancient clan, no matter how vast their reach or how old their grievance, would find easy to break. A bond forged not from shared blood or shared destiny, but from a decade of simply choosing again and again to show up for each other. It would need to hold in the trials that were coming. Neither of them yet understood just how soon or how severely that bond would be tested. Kaguro did not return alone. 11 days after his encounter with Goku, the sky above the land of fire tore open at midday, not the localized dimensional fold Kaguro himself had used, but something vastly larger, a fracture in reality wide enough to swallow a small mountain, radiating a pressure that every sensor-type shinobi in a 50-mile radius felt as a physical, nauseating weight settling over their chakra networks. 3 figures emerged from the tier. Kaguro was the smallest of them, flanked by 2 elder members of his clan's ruling branch, beings whose presence alone caused the surrounding forest to wither in concentric rings, whose eyes held the specific, terrible patience of entities who had watched civilizations rise and fall as a farmer watches successive harvests. The eldest of them, a Saiyan who gave his name only as Ashvatha, surveyed the scorched clearing where Kaguro's earlier confrontation had taken place with open, contemptuous disinterest. "You risked exposing us to a full Konoha military response over a single anomaly," Ashvatha said, his voice carrying no heat, only the flat, absolute authority of someone who had never once in his existence been meaningfully questioned. "Explain why this required our direct intervention rather than a routine cleansing." "Because it isn't a routine anomaly," Kaguro said, and for a being who had 11 days earlier spoken to Goku with such lofty condescension, there was now something almost like genuine deference in his voice. "I engaged it directly. It matched me, nearly bested me in fact, before I withdrew. The resonance signature isn't merely foreign, it echoes something none of our surviving records have properly catalogued in over 4,000 cycles." Ashvatha's ancient eyes narrowed. "Show me." The tier in the sky reached Konoha within the hour, delivered by a border patrol so shaken their initial report had to be corroborated twice before Hiruzen's war council accepted it as genuine. By the time the Hawkeye had mobilized every available Jonin and assembled his most trusted advisors in the war room, a second report arrived, more urgent than the first. Whatever had torn open the sky was moving, directly toward Konoha. Unhurried, methodical, and entirely unconcerned by the prospect of an entire hidden village mobilizing against it. "This is beyond anything in our operational history," Kakashi said grimly, studying the reconnaissance scrolls spread across the war table. "We're not looking at a rogue nin or even a hostile village's forces. Whatever's approaching moved through space itself to get here." "The Otsutsuki?" Hiruzen said, and the word settled over the war room with the particular weight of a myth being confirmed as devastatingly, immediately real. Goku stood at the back of the war room, having been summoned the moment the reports came in, the fighting feeling in his gut, a low, constant thrum of dread he hadn't experienced since arriving in this world. Beside him, Naruto's jaw was set tight, Sasuke and Sakura flanking them both, the entirety of Team 7 and Goku's team having been pulled into a briefing typically reserved for Jonin commanders and above, because Hiruzen understood with grim clarity that whatever was coming had been drawn here specifically because of the boy standing in his war room and pretending otherwise would only get more people killed. "Coming for me," Goku said quietly. "I should go out and meet them. Away from the village, if it's really just me they want." "It is not just you they want," Hiruzen said, cutting him off with unusual sharpness. "Kagero described you as an intrusion into a resource his clan considers theirs. If they've come in greater numbers, it is not merely to remove one variable. It is to reassert control over everything they consider their domain, which includes, as far as their historical conduct is concerned, this entire world's chakra itself. Sending you out alone would not save this village. It would simply mean you die first and the rest of us die shortly after, with one less ally standing between Konoha and annihilation." The war room fell into a heavy silence. "Then we fight together," Naruto said, breaking it, his voice carrying none of its usual brashness, just steady, absolute resolve. "All of us, every shinobi this village has." Otsutsuki party arrived at Konoha's outer perimeter as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in the kind of vivid orange-red that should have belonged to a peaceful evening rather than the opening act of a war the elemental nations had not fought in millennia. Ashvatta led the approach, flanked by Kagero and the second Elder Saiyan, their combined presence bending the air itself, chakra-sensitive shinobi along the village's outer walls collapsing to their knees from the sheer proximity of a power their training had never prepared them to withstand. Every available Jonin, Chunin, and Genin capable of holding a defensive line had mobilized along Konoha's walls. Kakashi commanded the eastern flank. Might Guy, having arrived with reinforcements from a neighboring outpost, anchored the west. Hiruzen himself, robes exchanged for the battle gear he hadn't worn in active combat in over a decade, stood at the village's central gate, prepared to spend whatever remained of his life-buying time for the evacuation already underway in the village's residential districts. Goku and Naruto stood together at the front of the assembled defense, Sasuke and Sakura flanking them, the four of them forming the tip of a spear that the entire village's hopes had, without anyone quite deciding it consciously, come to rest upon. "Impressive," Ashvatta said, surveying the assembled defenders with the same flat, unimpressed patience he'd shown surveying the scorched clearing days earlier. An entire village, mobilized to defend a single anomalous specimen. "Your species has always possessed a curious talent for sentimental miscalculation. You're wrong about one thing," Goku said, stepping forward, gold light already beginning to flicker at the edges of his hair, the fighting feeling in his gut building toward the same threshold he'd crossed 11 days earlier. "This isn't a village defending an anomaly. This is a village defending its home. I just happen to be part of it now." "Semantics," Ashvatta said, unmoved. "You will be removed from this world's equation, boy, whether you consider yourself part of its home or not. The only variable left to determine is how much of this village needs to burn in the process." Battle that followed would be recounted in the years afterward in fragments, because no single shinobi present, however skilled, retained a complete picture of a conflict that spanned the full breadth of Konoha's outer districts and reached power levels that shattered every prior benchmark the village's historical record contained. Kagero engaged Sasuke and Sakura directly, testing the young Uchiha's developing Sharingan against dimensional attacks that defied conventional prediction, forcing Sasuke into territory that pushed his bloodline's predictive capabilities to their absolute limit. a fight that would, in its aftermath, mark the first true catalyst for the awakening of Sasuke's Mangekyo, born not from the tragedy the original timeline had demanded, but from the sheer desperate necessity of surviving an opponent who existed partially outside conventional space. The second Elder Saiyan tore through Konoha's Jonin lines with a casual, devastating efficiency that might guy alone, unleashing gates he'd sworn to reserve only for the dire circumstances, managed to meaningfully slow rather than stop. And at the center of it all, Ashvatha turned his full attention to Goku and Naruto, the two boys who had, over a decade of choosing each other, become something the Otsutsuki Elder had not accounted for in any of his millennia of harvesting worlds like this one. A bond powerful enough to amplify strength that, by every rational measure, should have remained entirely separate. Naruto's transformation, when it came, was not the uncontrolled feral eruption that had nearly consumed Ren weeks earlier. It was deliberate, chakra drawn not in desperate, uncontrolled bursts, but in careful, practiced cooperation with the fox sealed inside him, a partnership built through years of the same stubborn, unwavering choice to trust that had defined every relationship Naruto had built since childhood. Golden orange chakra cloaked him, four tails of visible energy forming behind him, eyes sharpened with the fox's own feral awareness layered over his own unmistakable determination. You feel that. Naruto called to Goku, voice carrying over the chaos of the battle raging around them. That's not the fox taking over. That's us working together. Same thing you and I have been doing this whole time. Goku, gold light now blazing fully around him, hair standing on end, felt something in his chest settle into place. The same recognition of a fight worth giving everything to that he'd felt his entire life, sharpened now by 10 years of choosing this boy, this village, this world as unambiguously his own. Then let's show him what that actually means, Goku said, and the two of them moved together, not with any coordinated strategy either of them could have articulated beforehand, but with the seamless instinctive synchronization of a decade of fighting side by side. Ashvatha met them with the accumulated contemptuous confidence of a being who had never once, in 4,000 cycles of harvesting world after world, encountered resistance he considered genuinely threatening. That confidence lasted exactly as long as it took Naruto's chakra-cloaked strike, redirected mid-motion by Goku's own raw physical force into an angle Ashvatha hadn't accounted for, to land clean across the Elder Saiyan's chest, a blow that, for the first time in longer than Ashvatha could recall, actually staggered him. Impossible, Ashvatha said, genuine shock cracking his ancient composure for the first time. Your combined output exceeds the sum of your individual. That's kind of the whole point of having someone who's got your back, Naruto said, already moving again, Goku falling into step beside him without needing to be told, the two of them weaving between Ashvatha's retaliatory strikes with a fluency that came not from any technique either of them had trained in isolation, but from the simple, foundational fact of trusting each other completely. The fight that followed pushed both boys further than either had ever been pushed. Ashvatha, recovering from his initial shock, unleashed the full breadth of his clan's ancient techniques, dimensional strikes and reality-warping attacks that forced Goku through transformations he hadn't known he was capable of and drove Naruto's borrowed chakra toward its absolute upper limit. There were moments in the fight's most desperate stretch, when either boy alone would have fallen, a strike from Ashvatha that clipped Goku's shoulder hard enough to shatter bone, only for Naruto's chakra-enhanced speed to pull him clear before the follow-up attack landed. A counter-strike that would have taken Naruto's head clean off, blocked at the last possible instant by Goku's body interposing itself, absorbing the blow meant for his friend without hesitation. You keep doing that? Naruto gritted out, breathing hard, watching Goku shake off an injury that would have ended most shinobi's ability to fight entirely. Taking hits meant for me. Yeah, Goku said simply. Gonna keep doing it too. It was, in the end, neither Goku's raw physical power nor Naruto's borrowed chakra alone that turned the tide. It was the specific, decade-forged trust between them, the willingness to leave themselves open in ways neither would have risked with any other partner, confident that the other would be there to cover the gap. Ashvatha, for all his accumulated millennia of power, had never once needed to trust anyone. He had no framework for anticipating a strategy built entirely on mutual, unconditional faith. The Elder Saiyan's final overextension came in a moment of genuine, uncharacteristic desperation, a reality-tearing strike aimed to end the fight decisively, telegraphed just enough in his frustration for Naruto to read it and for Goku in the same fractional instant to understand exactly what needed to happen next. Now. Naruto shouted, and Goku, gold light blazing at its absolute peak, met Ashvatha's strike head-on rather than dodging it, absorbing the full force of the blow with his own body, while Naruto, freed by that sacrifice from needing to defend, drove a Fox Chakra-amplified strike directly into the Elder Saiyan's core. The resulting impact tore a visible fracture through the air itself, a shockwave that flattened trees for half a mile and sent both remaining Otsutsuki Saiyans reeling from the sheer force of their elder's defeat. Ashvatha collapsed to one knee, robes scorched, ancient composure utterly shattered, staring up at two exhausted, battered teenagers with something that, for the first time in his impossibly long existence, resembled genuine bewilderment. How he managed, did an anomaly and a Jinchuriki child manage what 4,000 cycles of harvested worlds never once accomplished? Goku, swaying on his feet, gold light finally beginning to fade, managed a tired, genuine smile. Because he's not just some Jinchuriki kid to me, he said, nodding toward Naruto. And I'm not just some anomaly to him. We're not fighting for a strategic advantage. We're fighting for each other. Guess that's not really a variable your equation ever accounted for. Kaguro and the second Elder Saiyan, witnessing their leader's defeat, made the calculated decision that further engagement risked losses their clan would not sanction for a single anomalous world. They withdrew, dragging a battered, humiliated Ashvatha back through a hastily formed dimensional tier, vanishing from Konoha's skis as abruptly as they'd arrived. The Elder Saiyan's parting words, delivered to Kaguro in the old tongue as they retreated, would not reach Konoha's ears for some time yet, a promise that this defeat would not be the end of the clan's interest in this world, merely a recalibration of the resources required to properly address it. But for now, in the immediate aftermath, Konoha was left standing, battered, scorched in places, several districts requiring extensive rebuilding but standing. Goku collapsed the moment the threat had fully retreated, exhaustion finally overtaking a body that had been pushed further than it ever had in this lifetime. Naruto caught him before he hit the ground, both of them sinking into the cratered earth together, breathing hard, alive, the weight of the entire village's survival settling slowly into something that finally felt like relief rather than terror. We did it, Naruto managed, disbelieving. Yeah, Goku said, voice hoarse but grinning despite everything. Told you we'd figure it out together. Around them, Konoha's shinobi began the slow, exhausted work of tending to the wounded and assessing the damage. But beneath the wreckage and the fear and the sheer scale of what had just been survived, something had shifted permanently in how the village understood the two boys at its center. They had not merely defended Konoha. They had proven in the clearest terms possible that a bond built on nothing more than years of quietly choosing each other could stand against a power that had gone unchallenged for 4,000 cycles. Hiruzen Sarutobi, finding them both still sitting in the crater long after the immediate chaos had settled, allowed himself, for the first time since the Night of the Nine Tails attack 16 years earlier, something that felt genuinely, unreservedly like hope for his village's future. The origin came in the end, not from some hidden scroll or a vision granted by mystical circumstance, but from something far stranger, a dream 3 nights after the battle, so vivid and complete that Goku woke gasping in the dark of his small apartment with a lifetime of memories that weren't memories of this lifetime at all. He saw a world with 2 suns and orange skis, a grandfather with a tail who taught him to fight before he could properly walk. He saw a farewell, not violent, not tragic, just quiet and deliberate, like a door closing gently rather than being slammed shut. A being of vast, ancient authority whose face he couldn't quite hold in focus, explaining in a voice that felt more like a memory of a feeling than actual words, that a soul as pure and unburdened as his had been chosen for something rare. Not a punishment, not an accident, but a placement. A world at the edge of losing something essential, the willingness to simply show up for people without calculation, without agenda needed, urgently a reminder of what that looked like. And a soul that had spent an entire prior lifetime embodying exactly that needed in turn, a second chance to matter in a place that would actually need him for it. You won't remember this, not at first, the voice had told him, in the dream that was also somehow a memory. You'll grow up not knowing why you're different, why the world feels both foreign and strangely yours all at once. That's intentional. The choices you make without knowing your purpose will matter more than any choice made in service of a destiny you were told to fulfill. Let the bonds you build be real, not predetermined. When you're ready, when it matters, you'll remember the rest. Goku sat with the dream for 2 full days before he told anyone, turning it over with the same careful, unhurried consideration he brought to very few things in his life. When he finally spoke, it was to Naruto on the same rooftop that had witnessed nearly every important conversation of the past decade. "I remember now," Goku said, "where I came from before, why I ended up here." Naruto listened, quiet and attentive, as Goku recounted everything: the two sons, the grandfather with the tail, a lifetime spent as the strongest fighter across an entire universe, and the strange, deliberate choice that had brought him here, stripped of his memories, to grow up ordinary and confused and chakra-blind in a village that hadn't asked for him any more than he'd asked for it. "So there was a reason," Naruto said slowly once Goku had finished. "This whole time. You were sent here on purpose." "Guess so," Goku said. "Some higher power or force or whatever it actually was decided this world needed something it was losing, and figured I had it to give." Naruto was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the village both of them had spent their entire lives defending, rebuilding, choosing. "Why did you stay, though?" he asked finally, and there was something raw and genuinely uncertain in the question, the specific vulnerability of someone who had spent years quietly afraid that the one person who'd never once treated him like a burden might eventually discover a bigger purpose and leave. "I mean, if that's really why you're here, some cosmic mission to save a world losing its heart or whatever, doesn't that make everything between us just part of the plan? Something you were always going to do, no matter who I turned out to be?" Goku considered this with the same unhurried seriousness he'd given the dream itself, and when he answered, there was nothing rehearsed or grand in it, just the same plain, uncomplicated honesty that had defined every choice he'd ever made in this life. "No," he said. "The reason I was sent here, that's not the same as the reason I stayed. Nobody told me to sit down next to a lonely kid at the edge of a training yard. Nobody told me to keep coming back year after year, or to tell you about Orochimaru the second I found out, or to put myself between you and Ashvatth's strike without even thinking about it. I did all of that because of you, not because of some mission I didn't even remember I had." He looked over at Naruto, steady and certain in a way that left no room for doubt. "You're not part of a plan, Naruto. You're the reason the plan turned out to matter at all. I was sent here to remind this world what it means to just show up for people. And the person who taught me that lesson meant the most, that's you, not some ancient prophecy, just you." Naruto's throat worked for a moment before he managed to speak again, blinking hard against something bright and overwhelmed building behind his eyes. "That's a stupid answer." "Probably," Goku agreed, echoing words spoken on this same rooftop a decade earlier when neither of them could have imagined how far that friendship would carry them. "But it's the true one, and I'm gonna keep having it no matter how many ancient clans or ominous prophecies show up to complicate things." Naruto laughed, wet, disbelieving, entirely unguarded, and for a long moment neither of them said anything else at all, because nothing else needed saying. Conclusion Konoha rebuilt in the months that followed not merely its scorched districts but something less tangible and more lasting. A village that had watched firsthand what a bond built on nothing but years of quiet, unconditional loyalty could accomplish against a threat older than the Sage of Six Paths himself. Urzen Sarutobi, in the twilight of his tenure as Hokage, would later reflect that Goku's arrival had taught the village something it had nearly forgotten in generations of war and political calculation. That strength divorced from genuine connection eventually hollows out into something brittle, while strength built on real, freely given loyalty can hold against forces that logic alone could never withstand. Goku never stopped being, in the ways that mattered most, exactly who he'd always been: chakra-blind, gloriously uncomplicated, allergic to political maneuvering, and utterly incapable of lying to the people he loved. But the village that had once filed him away as an unclassifiable anomaly now understood him as something else entirely, proof that a soul's origin mattered far less than the choices it made once it arrived. Naruto's path toward Hokage continued, steadier now, carried forward by a friendship that had been tested by gods and had not broken. The Otsutsuki threat had not vanished, Ashvatth's parting promise lingered, a storm still gathering somewhere beyond the world's edge, one that both boys understood they would eventually have to face again together when it finally arrived. But for now, in the quiet aftermath of a battle that should never have been survivable, two boys sat on a familiar rooftop under a sky finally at peace, having proven to a village, to an ancient clan, and most importantly to each other, that the truest kind of strength was never about where you came from. It was about who you chose to stay for. The will of fire burns brighter than any Saiyan legend. More stories await.